Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Amateur Radio General Class, session number 21. During our previous session, we had our little Q&A, followed by our usual question pool review. Then we discussed band edge and frequency range. We also discussed mobile operation and the power supply. We also discussed mobile operation interference, as well as HF antenna systems. We discussed solar cells, solar panels, battery storage, series diode, wind power, SSB, USB, LSB, making contact, and the concept of CQDX, as well as phone operations and radio settings. When we look at our curriculum, we see that we are progressing quite nicely, and we are actually in the operating procedures section, and we should be wrapping that up today and also commencing electrical and RF safety. Just a reminder of our practice exams. So we did have one question and answer from the last session. Actually, it was a question posed by Jermaine and very nicely answered by John. So I'm not sure if everyone in the last session saw it, but just in case anyone missed it, the question was, when using CW, does the transceiver convert the dits and dars to alphanumeric info for the receiver, or is it up to the receiver to interpret what the dits and dars mean? So I thought that was a very good question. And certainly I do appreciate having very experienced amateurs in our sessions, such as John, who was able to answer the question. And I agree with his answer, which is the best course of action is to learn how to interpret Morse code. So when you listen to it, you'll be able to decode what the Morse code signals are saying. Although there are some rigs and there are some devices and there is software that will attempt to decode Morse code. Quite frankly, I'm yet to find one that is pristine and does it very well to adjust to all of the vagaries of the different types of sending. So I do agree, John, that was an excellent answer, I think. So well done indeed. Okay, folks, so let's continue. So the last session, well, you know, from time to time, we do have some little errors in our slides. Actually, I think in our introduction, I have some errors there, so I'll correct it for the next session. But we did have an error on the last class with the slide that talked about the minimum frequency separation, SSB and CW. And the error was, there was a typo at the bottom there. It's supposed to be for CW, the minimum frequency separation should be between 150 to 500 hertz. I think we probably had an error there, kilohertz or something. So it's 150 to 500 hertz. Okay? Right. So at this point, we will go straight into our usual question pool review for the related to the questions from our last session and the theories that we looked at. Okay. So, right, let's go. All right. The first question, oh, by the way, for persons who are following, we are on page 72 of the No Nonsense General Class License Study Guide, the PDF version, page 72. Okay. So again, we will usually go quickly through our questions in the question pool simply because we have dealt with all of the theories and done a little bit of an explanation for each of them during our last session. So this is just for us to match the questions to the theory that we contemplated during our last class. What is a practical way to avoid harmful interference on an apparently clear frequency before calling CQ on CW or phone? So let's dissect this question. What are they asking us? So first of all, they're telling us that we are doing either CW, which is Morse code, or phone, which is voice. So what should we do to avoid causing harmful interference? What should we do to avoid causing interference? And we are on a frequency and it appears that that frequency is clear. What is the good practice? What should we do? We learned last class that if it's on CW, you send a QRL followed by a call sign. Or if you're using phone, which is voice, you're speaking, such as an SSB, ask if the frequency is in use, followed by a call sign. So that is the proper way before you go ahead and use a frequency. Even though it appears clear, you ask first, is it in use? And if it's in CW, QRL, followed by your call sign. And if it's voice, you say, is the frequency in use? 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf, for instance. So that's the way to avoid causing harmful interference. Next question in the question pool. So it relates to the previous question. What does the Q signal QRL mean? So recall we said that there are a couple Q codes or Q signals that you need to learn for the exam. This is one of them. QRL means, are you busy? Or is this frequency in use? Hence the reason we used it to answer the question before. QRL. Next question in the question pool. Which of the following complies with good amateur practice when choosing a frequency on which to initiate a call? The answer is, we must follow the voluntary band plan for the operating mode you intend to use. So remember, there's a voluntary band plan. So modes are assigned to specific subsegments of the band that as a ham you have access to. You should not transmit voice in the section of the band that is designated for, let's say, a digital mode. So that's a voluntary band plan. And it's good amateur radio practice. Okay, next question. So the word question is missing here. What is the voluntary band plan restriction for US stations transmitting within the 48 contiguous states in the 50.1 to 50.125 megahertz band segment? Okay, let's dissect this. What are they asking us? So they're first of all telling us that the frequency range that they're asking us about is 50.1 to 50.125. So there's something special about that little range or that frequency band segment. And they're telling us that we are a US station within the 48 contiguous states of the US. And there's a restriction. What is that restriction? The answer is only contacts with station not within the 48 contiguous states. So what that simply means is that if you are in the US and you are transmitting to another station within the US, you should not use this frequency range. It is reserved for when you are making contact with a DX station, a foreign station, or at least a station that is outside of the 48 contiguous US states. Next question. When selecting an SSB transmitting frequency, what minimum separation should be used to minimize interference to stations on adjacent frequencies? So I think we learned last class that for SSB, the minimum frequency separation is approximately 3 kilohertz. Related question, the next one up. When selecting a CW transmitting frequency, what minimum separation should be used to minimize interference to stations on adjacent frequencies? Similar question to the previous one. The only difference is they are now asking us about CW, or Morse code, versus SSB. So we had it in the corrected slide a little while ago as well. So that minimum frequency separation for CW is between 150 to 500 hertz. Next question in the question pool. What is good amateur practice if propagation changes during a contact and you notice interference from other stations on the frequency? So recall last class we said sometimes we're having a conversation and of course propagation changes while we're speaking, and all of a sudden a station that we weren't hearing before we start to hear. So that's what they're asking about. So what should we do? What is good amateur practice if that starts to happen and another station starts causing us interference? So, of course, we say courtesy is contagious, so that's the way we do the courteous way. Attempt to resolve the interference problem with the other stations in a mutually acceptable manner. Next question. Which of the following is true concerning access to frequencies? Except during emergencies, no amateur station has priority access to any frequencies. Remember we said no hams own any frequency. It's all by mutual agreement. So we need to have, again, courtesy. So unless it's an emergency, no one has priority, even nets, believe it or not. Okay. Next question. When is an amateur station allowed to use any means that's at its disposal to assist another station in distress? So we discussed this ad nauseum last class, and we said the answer to that is at any time during an actual emergency. When you have an actual emergency, distress situation, life or death, you're allowed to use any means at your disposal as a ham to save a life. Okay, but it must be an actual emergency. Okay. What frequency should be used to send a distress call? So, sometimes we have different frequencies that we'll say is an emergency frequency. But what frequency should you use when there's a distress or you're in distress? The answer is simply whichever frequency has the best chance of communicating the distress message. And that may not necessarily be a quote-unquote designated emergency channel or frequency. Whichever one will get the message across, because you are in distress. Time is short, and it could be a life at stake. So whichever has the best chance. Okay. So some of you might be saying, but wait a minute, some of these questions and answers are fairly common sense. Yeah, I guess you'll be right. All right. What is the first thing you should do if you are communicating with another amateur station and hear a station in distress break in? So two amateurs are talking, having a nice conversation about some topic, and then they hear a distress call. What should they do? Acknowledge the station in distress and determine what assistance may be needed. Again, a fairly straightforward answer. Next question. Who may be the control operator of an amateur station transmitting in races to assist relief operations during a disaster? So who may be the control operator when you're operating RACES? Remember, RACES meant Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. So who may be the control operator? And we said that that person, only a person holding an FCC-issued amateur operator license is authorized to be the control operator. Okay, moving right along. What is the best speed to use when answering a CQ in Morse code? So let's dissect this question. So someone is calling for another station. So that's what is meant by answering a CQ. Someone is calling CQ, calling any station. What speed should you use when it comes to Morse code? The answer is the fastest speed at which you are comfortable copying, but no faster than the CQ. In other words, if the CQ is transmitting at 25 words per minute, and you could do 30 words per minute or more, you should not go that fast. You should go only up to 25, which is what the other person can do. Of course, if you can only do 15, well, you should go at 15, and hopefully that person will back off and come down to meet your speed. So that's the answer. Next question, sticking with CW. What does the term 0 beat mean in CW operation? So during our slides, we said that 0 beat meant matching the transmit frequency, or I should say your transmit frequency, to the frequency of a received signal. So that is what is meant by 0 beating or 0 beat. Okay. Next question. When sending CW, what does a C mean when added to the RST report? Okay, let's dissect this question. So first of all, we're talking about CW, or Morse code. And we're saying that we're adding to the RST report. Remember, we said that we normally give a signal report. That's a fairly common thing to do. So in the case of CW, it may be something like 599 or some other version. We gave a whole table as to what the various digits mean when you get a signal report. But if you have a C that's coming after the digits, what it means is that your signal is chirpy or unstable. Next question. Okay, so we did say we have a number of Q codes or Q signals to learn the meaning of. We gave a simple way to try to remember them. But here they go. What should you do if a CW station sends QRS? So if you hear QRS or CQRS, that means to send slower. You're sending too fast. Okay. Remember we said that, think about it, the last S there, S, slow. There we go. What does the Q signal QSL mean? It means I acknowledge receipt. Next question. What does the signal QRN mean? It means I am troubled by static. So again, a little tip. N for noise, so you could try to remember it that way. Static is noise. There we go. And the last one. What does the Q signal QRV means? What does it mean? It means I am ready to receive messages. Okay. Remember we said V, receive. All right, so a little way to remember. Okay. Next question. What does it mean when a CW operator sends KN at the end of a transmission? It means listening only for a specific station or stations. So that's the pro word or pro sign. KN. Next one. What pro sign is sent to indicate at the, say again, what pro sign is sent to indicate the end of a formal message when using CW? That pro sign is AR. Okay. Next question. Which of the following describes full break-in telegraphy? All right, so we had described, we showed a nice diagram to show and illustrate that when you're sending CW, you may want to hear if there's anyone else transmitting under your signal, just in case it's an emergency, for instance. And so if you allow this full break-in setting, you will be able to hear those stations between your transmissions or between your characters. So that's the answer. It means that transmitting stations can receive between code characters and elements. Okay, moving right along. Next question in the question pool. And just a reminder, in case anyone has forgotten, just next to the question is the question pool number. And if you want to find the question in the question pool that we circulated to all attendees, you can copy this and paste it when you do a Control F find in the PDF, and you will find the full question in the question pool. And not only will you see the correct answer, you will also see A, B, C, D, which will be including the distractors or the incorrect answers. Okay, what is the volunteer monitoring program? Amateur volunteers who are formally enlisted to monitor the airwaves for rule violation. Okay, some people like to refer to it as amateur radio police, right? Okay, which of the following are objectives of the volunteer monitoring program? It is to encourage amateur radio operators to self-regulate and comply with the rules. Okay, so we police ourselves as hams. What skills learned during hidden transmitter hunts are of help to the volunteer monitoring program? So we said that if you have to find errant transmitters or errant operators, being able to locate stations using direction finding techniques are helpful. So that's the answer. direction finding used to locate stations violating FCC rules. So that's a good skill if you want to be part of the volunteer monitoring program. Next question. Which of the following describes an azimuthal projection map? So during our slide deck, we showed what an azimuthal projection map looks like. You saw that you could find the direction of a station with respect to yours as well as how far it is. So that's the answer. A map that shows true bearings and distances from a particular location. So if you want a reminder what that looks like, you can check the slides or the videos from our last session. How is a directional antenna pointed when making a long path contact with another station? So remember we said the long path is in the opposite direction to the short path. So the answer is 180 degrees from a station's short path heading. In other words, the opposite direction. Okay, last question in the question pool before we dig into some more theory, before we take our break. Which of the following is typical of the lower HF frequencies during the summer? And we had said that during those months, summer months, June, July, August, in the northern hemisphere, you tend to have a lot of high levels of atmospheric noise or static. And that's usually caused by these thunderstorms. So, that's it for our question pool review for today. So let's go right back to our trusty slide deck. Okay, trust we are doing well. All right, so let's go into some theory. When, as an amateur radio operator, we would like to talk with another amateur station, we'd like to communicate with another station. So you wanna make a contact. You want to call to see if there are any amateur radio operators available to talk. How do you do that? Well, you find a clear frequency. Remember we had said earlier, you should actually ask if the frequency is in use. But once you have done that, what you do is you say CQ a few times, followed by this is, then you state your call sign a few times. After that, you stop or you pause and listen to see if anyone is responding to you. And if you don't hear anyone respond, you repeat that CQ call, I guess, as many times as you need to for someone to hear you and respond. So for example, on our screen here, if I were making a CQ call, I will say CQ, CQ, CQ. This is 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf, 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. And you'll notice I'm using the phonetics in calling out my call sign. We'll come to that point in a little while. So this is practically how we make a call or CQ call. So we say here that we looking to make a contact with any station. We repeat CQ a few times, followed by this is, then your call sign a few times. Then you pause to listen for a response, and if not, you repeat the call as necessary. And this is an example of what a call may look like, something along these lines. So I did mention that when I'm making that CQ call, I use the phonetic version of the alphabet when I'm giving my call sign. I said 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. That's good practice. So we say it's good practice when you're identifying your station to use the NATO phonetic alphabet. And that phonetic alphabet, we came across it already in the technician class, I believe. But on the right-hand side here, we have a little chart of the phonetics. And it goes Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. And this is the way they'll ask you the question in the question pool. Right? So I'll give a little example here. 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. That's how we'll use the phonetic alphabet in identifying our station. But we have the letters here, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot. And if you want to remember what the actual phonetic is, there are some little graphics that will help you remember. So you have, hotel looks like a hotel, Alpha looks like the alpha character, and so on. If you need that. One quick way often get the question, well, how do I learn the phonetic alphabet? Well, one quick way, depending on what country you live in, you will have license plates, and some of them will be a combination of letters and numbers. So if you want to practice it, just look at the next license plate that passes by and say it in phonetics. So for example, if I see a vehicle pass in Trinidad and Tobago, I see TCW, I'll think Tango, Charlie, Whiskey, and I just keep doing that, and you'll be surprised how quickly you will recall or remember the phonetics, or your name. Learn your name in the phonetics, and when you are spelling someone else's name, think about it phonetically. That's a very quick way to develop familiarity with the phonetic alphabet. And note, this is a sore point sometimes with contesters. When you're identifying your station in contests, you are required to do so as per the normal regulations. All right, so we do hear sometimes during contests different practices, but we are learning the correct thing as students. We're going to do exams. So note for the exam that in a contest, you're required to identify your station as per usual or the normal FCC regulations, not another regulation. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we know we use Radio Germany for RG and so on, right? Yeah, okay, cool. We're learning the correct thing. Okay, so the next thing that we need to know about is the concept of station logs. So there are a couple of ways to do the station logs. And I'll touch that point first, and then I'll come to the first point in the bullet point afterwards. So on the right-hand side here is an example of a station log. I'll have my call sign, and then I'll state the date, the time, and usually our time should be recorded in UTC, Universal Coordinated Time, which is about the same as GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. And of course, the frequency that we had the communication on, the mode, so let's say it's LSB or USB or FT8 or something, the power that we're running, and the station call sign that we communicated with. And of course, we have our signal report and any other information that we would like to note here. So this is an example of a station log. And it's a good idea to keep a station log for several reasons. For instance, you may want to verify your contact with someone, issue a QSL card as memorabilia, for example. Yeah. And on the left-hand side here is an example of electronic log. This electronic log is actually a snapshot out of QRZ. So there are several ways. You have Logbook of the World, you have Log4OM, several pieces of software and cloud services that you can use to keep an electronic log. So we say that it's a good idea. In some territories, it's mandatory that you still keep a log as well. But for the purpose of our exams, we say that a reason to keep a station log is to help with a reply if the FCC requests information. Right? So that's what you need to know for the exam. Very good to keep a log. Matter of fact, I can't think of a reason not to keep a log other than laziness. All right. So QRP, which is another Q code. QRP operation means running low power when you're transmitting. And we have a couple of photos here. We have some little tins here with a transmitter. Some of you might know of Strepsils. Those types of little cans, people can build a little transceiver and put them inside of there, yes. So that might just run some milliwatts. But we have a Qrp transceiver here at the bottom, meaning a low power transceiver. And Qrp is usually for Morse code about 5 watts or less. And on SSB about 10 watts peak envelope power or less. So that's low power when you're running QRP operation. So if someone tells you running QRP, all they're telling you is that they are running low power. Just last evening, I communicated with a station in France, and he actually sent me an email and said, Robbie, I was actually running QRP, 5 watts or so. So some persons see it as a challenge that you're running low power to make the contact. That means they have optimized antennas and feed lines and that sort of thing like that. So very well tuned, and they're able to make that contact even though they're running low power. Propagation is really good as well. So you need to know for the exam that QRP operation refers to low power transmit. All right, let's just do one more slide before we take our break. So just remember, whenever we talk about a digital mode in amateur radio, we are talking about using a computer connected to a transceiver to encode and decode, or to send and receive signals. So digital mode synonymous with a computer connected to a transceiver, more or less. So just bear that in mind every time we talk about digital modes. And some of those digital modes are like RTTY, RTTY, radio teletype, PSK31, JT65, FT8, Pactor. Those are the digital modes, the typical digital modes that you'll hear about. There are many, many, many more than that, of course. But of course, they all require or rely upon a computer to be connected to the transceiver to generate those audio tones and to also decode and display the incoming messages on the computer screen. So when you hear digital mode, think computer connected to your radio. So you're not speaking, talking with a microphone and your voice going into the radio and going over the airwaves. It's a computer that is sending the audio signals or tones to the transceiver, to the transmitter, to send out to the antenna. So we have a couple of slides on digital modes coming up again. So always bear that in the back of our minds when we think digital modes. We also need to be aware, we talked about the voluntary band plan previously. We showed this slide a couple of times. And within the band plan, there are sub-segments or sub-bands, as we may call them. What that means is that a part of the band, so we may have the 20-meter band, for example, but a part of that 20-meter band is dedicated to digital modes. Another part will be dedicated to, let's say, voice or phone modes and that sort of thing. So we need to be aware that there are segments or sub-bands for these digital modes. And we need to learn for the exam, and this you really have to commit to memory, the parts of the various bands that's dedicated to digital transmission. So we need to learn for the 20-meter band, the segment that we use for digital transmission or digital modes is between 14.070 to 14.112. Just need to learn that. That's the segment of the 20-meter band. Remember, we can give bands in meters on frequency. Okay, so just note for 20 meters, this is the frequency range. Also, we need to know for, again, the 20-meter band, there's a segment that we normally use for the PSK 31 operations, and we need to know that it's below the RTTY segment near 14.070. So you'll notice there's a similarity to these 2 points or these 2 questions. They both have 14.070 in them. Right? So this is for PSK operations, and note that it's just below the RTTY or RTTY, radio telephony segment, near 14.070. Just need to learn that. Also, another segment on the 80-meter band this time for digital mode is 3585 to 3600. Now note that this is given in kilohertz. So if it were megahertz, we'd have said 3.585 to 3.600. But of course, they like to tie us up in these exams. But of course, we know from our training that we can convert from megahertz to kilohertz and so on. So we're not worried, we're not fazed by seeing it represented in this format as megahertz or in this format as kilohertz. We know how to convert between the two. So for the 80-meter band, just need to learn that that is the segment for digital modes, 3585 to 3600. So folks, we will take a short break at this time. Please take a stretch, have a bathroom break, drink some water, and we'll be right back in about 2 minutes' time. Okay, welcome back everyone. So before we move on to the next slide, at the start of the session, just before we actually commenced the session, we were doing a little demo of the FT8 digital mode. So those who joined the class about 5 minutes early would have seen a little demo of FT8. And also just to mention, these frequencies that we're talking about on the slide, those are the frequencies that will be displayed on our radio or transceiver on our rig when we are doing these digital modes. So that will be the display between 14070 or 14.070 and 14.112. That's the frequency that will be displayed on your screen when you select it using the dial, or if you tell the software via the cat control to change the frequency on the radio. That's the range that the digital modes will be utilizing. So similarly on the 80 meter band, this is the frequency that will be read out. This range anywhere between these two frequencies is where you will find digital transmissions on the 80 meter band. Okay, so we are sticking with digital modes, and we are now going to talk about RTTY, RTTY, radio teletype. So we have dealt with RTTY before during the technician class, and we have also discussed it already during the general class, but we're giving another little spin on RTTY. So we may remember that RTTY uses signals that shifts between two frequencies, and that resultant mode is called frequency shift keying, or FSK. And the difference between the two frequencies is considered the frequency shift. So hence the reason frequency shift keying. And for the exam, we need to know that the most common frequency shift for RTTY is 170 Hertz. So that's the most common for RTTY on the HF bands, 170 Hertz. So again, we just showed what a RTTY signal looks like on a waterfall or a scope. And of course, just a reminder that anytime we're talking about digital modes, let it not be lost upon us that we require a computer to be connected to the transceiver. Of course, some of you may say, but you know, there are some transceivers that can encode and decode RTTY without a computer, and that is probably very true. But in the main and generally, you need a computer to connect to a transceiver to do digital modes. All right, so we just talked about FSK, frequency shift keying. But we can also use a computer to send modulated audio or audio to the transceiver. And when we do that, it is called AFSK, or audio frequency shift keying. So we can do RTTY using FSK, and we can also do RTTY using AFSK. We need to know for the exam that if we are doing RTTY via AFSK, the mode that we normally use on our radio, remember we have a choice when we're doing SSB to choose either between LSB, which is lower sideband, and USB, upper sideband. Well, the convention is when we are doing RTTY and using AFSK, audio frequency shift keying, our transmitter should be set to lower sideband or LSB, and you need to know that for the exam. Of course, when we're doing any of the other digital modes, everything except RTTY, it's actually the opposite. So RTTY, we use LSB, but with all of the other modes, JT65, FT8, all of those modes, and we are doing AFSK, we use USB. So don't matter what the band is, once you're doing those digital modes, FT8, it's going to be USB no matter what the band is. So you need to learn that for the exam, that USB is used for all these other modes, and RTTY uses LSB, and that's the only mode. Rest of them uses, or will use, USB, upper sideband. Okay, so we did say that when we are doing digital modes, we have to connect a computer to our transceiver, and we have several signals that go between. We have the audio signals, we have what we call the cat control between the radio and the computer. So you have different signals. For the general class, we need to learn about one of the types of connectors that we use. And I'll spend a little time on this slide, right? So one of the connectors that we use or can use, we know today's world, USB is a very popular connector, and you do have modern transceivers that will have a USB connector, and you will have a USB cable that goes to the laptop or the computer to make that connection. But many of the older rigs, and even some of the new rigs, still contain a serial port, or what we call an RS-232 serial port. So USB is very popular today, but we still need to learn about the serial port, which was very common many years ago. You almost always had a serial port on a computer. Nowadays, you may hardly find a serial port on a computer. You may find a USB to serial port dongle. But our slightly older computers will have them, and we can still use them. As a matter of fact, some will say the serial port has really not gone anywhere. Don't mind, we have USB around, right? So we need to still be familiar with the serial port. This is what it looks like, the male and the female, right? So sometimes one is what we call DTE and the other one is called DCE, data terminal, data communication. So these are physically what it looks like. And you may say, yes, I've seen that on a computer before. I've seen that on the back of a radio. I've seen that on some device that I have. So we need to learn about the serial port, RS-232 serial port. That's what it is. And we need to know about the connector. Now, this is where I'm going to spend a little time because there are some little misconceptions about the name of this connector. So this connector here, we're saying that it's a good choice for serial data, and it's called DE9, Delta Echo 9. So, of course, I'm already hearing a lot of persons in the class, wait, no, that's a DB9. All right, so you wouldn't be wrong by calling it a DB9. People do call it DB9, but it's really the name of the connector is actually called DE9. And that's what I've put this up here just to show you. This connector is a DA15. This is a DB25. This is a DC37. This is a DD50. And this is the DE9. All right. So it is DE9. But we do and have called it the DB9 as well. Right. So sometimes we may only be familiar with DB25 and we call this one DB9. And DB9 is quite fine to call it, you know. Because DB stands for DB subminiature. But the correct name, and for the exam, it's not a typo, it's DE9. It's fine for you to call it DB9, but for your exam, know that that connector that we're looking at here, that's going to come in your exam, that serial port, the connector itself, which is a good choice for serial data, is a DE9. All right, hope I emphasized that enough. Okay, we're sticking with digital modes, and this time we're going to talk about FT8. So again, I said at the start of the session, we did do a little demo just to show participants what FT8 is about, you know, to make it real so you can see, and we actually showed a couple of contacts, made a couple of contacts using FT8. All right, so what is FT8? Well, it's one of the digital modes. And if you recall, what is a digital mode? That is when we use a computer and connect it to a transceiver and we communicate. So we're not using our voice, we're using the computer to send digital signals. Remember, some of us may remember long ago with modems. If you have a modem connected to your phone line and you picked up your phone line, you will hear some digital noises. Well, that's kind of what is happening here. The computer is generating tones and sending to your transceiver to go over the airwaves. So you, of course, use software like WSJTX. I have a little typo here, WSJTX. And, of course, one of the things when you're using FT8 as a digital mode is that your computer time needs to be very accurate within 1 second. So that's why we would need to synchronize our time. So quite often, that computer that's running FT8, you may have a little time sync software that will check periodically and update your time. Because that's very important when you're using FT8. The computer time needs to be accurate within approximately 1 second, and that's an exam question. So on the right-hand side here is one of the variants of the FT8 software suite called WSJTX. This is what it looks like. Persons who joined the class just a couple of minutes before it started would have seen this running, and you would have seen some contacts being made here. All right, so there are a couple of things that we need to know about the FT8 mode. And I have a little blown up version of what you actually see on the screen. This is what you actually see using the WSGTX software. These are the contacts. So let's just take a moment to describe what we are seeing here. So on our software, our WSGTX software, this is part of what we'll see in the screen. So it's blown up. So this is the whole screen here, but we've just extracted out this little piece here. So this first row here, if we were to deal with it, you probably guessed that this first number is the time. The second number is the signal strength. This third number is actually the time difference. And of course, the next number is the frequency offset. And what we have here is the actual exchange. So what is happening here is that this station, Sierra Papa 8 Oscar November Victor, was calling 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf, and Sierra Papa 8 Oscar November Victor, his grid square, and we had talked about what grid square was. That's how you identify your location. It's a kind of GPS type of locator. So once you have your grid square, you have a pretty good idea where in the world that station is. And we have an example here for you in case we've forgotten what the grid square looks like. So for example, Trinidad is within the Foxtrot Kilo grid square, for instance. And of course, you have some letters and digits afterwards. So this is his grid square. Now I say his. This is Alexander Badzian. If I'm not, hopefully I have not misappropriated his name. And he's located in Poland. So he's making a call to 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. So right after, 15 seconds later, what we have here is a reply transmission, and it's going to Sierra Papa 8 Oscar November Victor, and it's from 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. And that transmission is giving the received signal. Notice that minus 03. Notice here minus 3 as well. So this is the exchange here. So this is the call. The first row is the call where Alexander makes the call to 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. And then 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf responds to Alexander here by saying, I am receiving you at signal strength 3. And then the next row now, Alexander sends a transmission, and he tells 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf that he received him at signal minus 18. So received minus 18. And then the next row here is 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf does a transmission to Sierra Papa 8 Oscar November Victor and says, Roger 73, thank you for the contact. And then of course right after, Alexander sends his transmission and tells 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf 73. All right, so this is an FT8 exchange. This is a communication, and those who joined before we actually began would have seen a couple of those transmissions using a computer and a transceiver, not speaking, but using the computer to send our signals. And this is an example of an amateur radio contact via FT8. We need to know that a characteristic of the FT8 mode using the WSGTX software, you have a limited number of bits of information that you send. Notice here, there's not a whole lot. We didn't say, hi, how are you doing? The weather is fine. There's Hurricane Ida in the Caribbean. No, we didn't do all of that. We just basically said, contact, okay, signal, right? Receive signal, okay, thanks, bye-bye. Very limited exchange of information here. So we have call signs exchange. Notice the call signs. And notice every single transmission, you see both call signs. That's how important call signs are. We always emphasize when we're communicating as hams, as amateur radio operators, the importance of always giving our call signs. If we wouldn't give any call signs, who is communicating with whom? You wouldn't know. So call signs, grid locators. So notice that Alexander has given his grid locator, and also signal reports. Notice here, minus 03 is the signal report that I'm giving him, and minus 18 is the signal report that he's giving me, and so on. So this is essentially what we exchange when we do a communication using the FT8 digital mode, using the WSGTX software. Of course, this information about Alexander is taken from this QRZ web page. That's qrz.com. You just put in the call sign of the amateur operator, And once you're logged in, it gives you address information and so on. Right. Right. We also need to be aware that when we are using digital modes and we are configuring our digital mode, we have to make sure that our radio is properly tuned. And we also need to make sure that we have a couple of things that are correctly configured. But what are those things? So when we are configuring our frequency, we have to tune it to the correct frequency. When we are configuring our software, we also have to make sure that this software is properly configured. So the point that has been made here, if you do not configure it properly, you will find you get into trouble decoding the signals. It will look garbled. You may not be able to get any kind of decode at all, or it may be decoded very poorly. So we're saying that if you're using RTTY, or any other type of FSK signal, and you tune the frequency properly, so you have the correct frequency, but you're still getting problems, these are the following things that you may have incorrectly configured. The mark and space frequencies may be reversed. The other thing could be that you have the wrong baud rate. And last but not least, you're on the wrong sideband. For example, you may have needed to be on LSB, but you're somehow on USB. So these are the things for the exam that you need to know, that if you have these things incorrectly configured, you may not be able to decode RTTY or any other type of FSK signals properly. So these are actually exam questions. Again, we are still with digital modes. And on the right-hand side here is a screenshot of a piece of software known as FLDigi. Okay, you could probably see Franz smiling. All right, so we are going to talk now about another digital mode, Pactor, and its associated communication system, Winlink. All right, so Winlink is a communication system that is very robust, but we can also use the Pactor protocol, and we can also utilize the internet to transfer messages. So you need to know that for the exam, that Winlink communications can also use the internet to transfer messages. Sometimes people think Winlink is only about RF. RF, yes, but it has gateways, or what we call RMS gateways, that you can use to transfer the messages. Also, the client, you can use Telnet, which is over IP, using internet, and communicate over the internet. So this is the point, and they will ask you that question in the exam. Can Winlink use the internet to transfer messages? The answer is yes. But it's very robust on RF. So the next point that we're making here is that when we are about to make a contact, we can make that contact by sending a transmission to the gateway station. But to know what frequency that we should make that transmission on, we should look up the published frequency for that station and send it a contact or connect message. So if you're using Winlink Express, for example, you can download an updated list of the frequencies that each of the RMS gateway stations are assigned. And that's how you know what frequency to transmit on, because it's in the software. Also, if you want to know if the channel is in use, you can actually put the modem or the Pactor modem or controller in a mode that allows you to monitor without actually making a connection. So you can see if it is busy. On the more modern or the newer modems, there's actually a display on the front of it that will actually show you the waterfall, and a readout that will tell you if the frequency is busy as well. But the point about this for the exam is that you need to know that you can tell if the channel is in use by putting it into a monitoring mode without actually requesting or making a connection to another station. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Pactor and also WinMore. Now, WinMore was, using the word was, is another sound card based mode that could have been used with Winlink. Why I say is and was and so on is that has actually been deprecated. It's not really used in favor of some other protocols such as RDOP, and RDOP is Amateur Radio Digital Open Protocol, I think. Also there's VARA HF, and there's of course Pactor. So win more is not really used, but it's still in your exam. You will see the term win more. So just bear in mind, as hams, win more is not really used anymore. I'm not even sure if there are any gateway stations running in Winmore again. You'll find them using Pactor, Vara HF, and AddUp. So what we need to be aware of for our exam is that there are some symptoms that can occur if we have other signals that interfere with our Pactor signals or our Winmore signals. Right? So again, in the exam, they'll ask you about Winmore. So just bear that in mind. So both Pactor and Winmore can suffer from the following symptoms if you have an interference signal. Firstly, you can have frequent retries or timeouts, meaning that your station is trying to connect and connect and connect and connect, and it's not really making a connection. It's trying, and it's not getting through, and then it may time out the transmission. That's one symptom that you may have interference signals. Another one would be long pauses in the message transmission. It's taking a very long time. So that is an indication that you may have some interference signals. And of course, last but not least, complete failure to establish a connection. You're trying, and there's absolutely no connection. So that's one of the things that it could be. You can have signals that are interfering with you. Of course, there are other reasons, but for the exam, you need to know that this is what the symptoms would be if you have an interfering signal when you're doing the digital mode, Pactor, or Winmore using Winlink. The other thing that we need to know about Pactor is that if two stations are communicating using the Pactor digital mode, it's a station-to-station contact, so that you as a third person wanting to get into the conversation cannot. So Pactor is a station-to-station communication, and you have to wait until those two stations have finished their communication before you can have a communication. You can't just jump into the middle and say contact and you want to talk with either of them. No, you have to wait. So that's the point of the last bullet point here. Joining an existing contact in progress between two stations that use Pactor, it's not possible, as Pactor connections are limited to two stations. All right, so we're going to go a couple minutes over our usual 1 hour. So I trust I have your permission. So we come to the point of safety. Safety is the most important priority as an amateur radio operator. There's nothing that is more important than safety. You do not want to cause any harm to yourself or to anyone else. And therefore, that's why we are trained as amateur radio operators. That's why we go through all of this, to learn how we can do so safely. We would have dealt with things like grounding and bonding in a previous session. That's also apart from performance, it's also part of our safety regimen. And we'll go through some of this again. We touched on this a bit also during the technician class. But you do have some exam questions during the general class, and we'll go through those concepts very quickly. So the first thing is that RF energy could be detrimental to you as an individual and to persons around. RF energy can burn. So for the exam, you need to know that RF energy can affect human body tissues because it can heat those body tissues, and you can get a pretty nasty RF burn. Right? If you think about it, we have microwave ovens. It's very popular, and we'll stick our plate in with some food and microwave. But that is actually RF energy that is heating up the molecules in the food. And because those molecules are moving, that's where the heat is generated. So you don't want to be in front of a magnetron, which is what the microwave ovens are based on, because it will heat you, it will cook you. So it's the same thing with RF energy. You need to respect all forms of RF energy because it has the potential to do that. That's why we say don't go touch an antenna while it's transmitting. Don't go too near. You have exposure limits and you have distances that you need to keep. But we need to learn about a couple of concepts in respect of our radiation exposure. So we need to be familiar with the definition of what time averaging is. And in reference to RF radiation, time averaging means the total RF or radio frequency exposure averaged over a certain time. That's the definition that you need to learn for the exam. We also need to know that when we are evaluating our RF exposure limits, that the duty cycle, and we touched on duty cycle already, on the bottom here, we have a little diagram that may jog your memory when we talked about duty cycle, which is the percentage of time that the transmitter is transmitting over its period. So we're saying that the duty cycle can affect your RF exposure because a lower transmitter duty cycle permits greater short-term exposure levels. So if the transmitter is transmitting for a lesser amount of time, you can have more exposure to it. If the transmitter is transmitting more, then you cannot stay in that range or that vicinity for as long. So we need to know that for the exam in terms of evaluating your RF exposure to transmitters and the antennas. Also, we need to know that when we are considering or estimating whether or not our RF signal is going to exceed the MPE or the maximum permissible exposure, there are three parameters or properties that we need to be aware of. We discussed already the duty cycle, but also the frequency as well as power density. So frequency is what frequency the transmitter is transmitting on. Is it HF, is it VHF, is it UHF? What part of the spectrum? What is the frequency that determines the MPE? Also the power density, the power levels. Are you transmitted at 100 watts, 1000 watts, 1500 watts? QRP, you're running 5 watts or 10 watts. What is the power level or power density in respect of where you are? So we need to learn these points for the exam. These are the properties that are important when we are estimating our RF exposure limits or our maximum permissible exposure. So again, we need to learn this for the exam. Again, safety first. And sticking with safety, we also need to be aware that if, as an amateur radio operator, this is your transceiver, very lovely ICOM IC 7300 HF rig, and you have a piece of feed line, maybe LMR 400 coax or something, or it could be ladder line, something feeding your very nice HF antenna. And you decide that you want to go and adjust this antenna. Maybe the SWR is high or something like that. Or you want to repair it. Maybe a bird sat on the element and broke it. I don't know. But you want to repair the antenna, or you want to tune the antenna, or you want to adjust it. You should, as a precaution, first off, turn off your transmitter, turn off that transceiver, do not leave it on, because next thing someone comes in the room and presses on the microphone or presses on the transmit button on the radio, or a book falls on it inadvertently and it's transmitting and you are holding on to this antenna. Not good at all. So as a precaution, safety precaution, take it off. Also, the other thing you may want to do as well, as another precaution, is to disconnect the feed line from the transmitter. Or you could disconnect it at the antenna end, either way, but disconnect, or maybe better at both ends. But the idea is safety in mind. You want to disconnect the possibility, because even if you switched off the transceiver, guess what? Somebody may come and turn it on. They don't know you're outside there. Maybe you have another ham in the house. Or it could be someone who doesn't know and say, hey, let me just turn this thing on. So you want to prevent it. So you may want to unplug it. You may want to switch it off. You may want to put a label on it as well. You may want to put a big sign and say transmitter maintenance in progress and cover it. So in case someone comes, they will know, wait a minute, I can't use the radio. You are taking these precautions. Turn it off and disconnect the feed line before you do any repairs, maintenance, or adjustments to your antenna. Okay, on our right-hand side here, we have a very nice ground-mounted antenna. And notice we have a gentleman that's right here, and he seems very close to the antenna. So we need to be aware that there's a precaution that we should take when we are installing a ground-mounted antenna. That is, it should be installed in such a way that a person cannot inadvertently come into contact with it. So we say you need to have it protected against unauthorized access. You don't want someone, adult or child or anybody, to come and go and touch that antenna while you are transmitting. So take that precaution, install it in such a way that you protect against unauthorized access. Okay, sticking with the concept of safety. Remember, safety first. Safety is our #1 priority. So as a ham, there comes a time when you may have a tower, either yours or at another station or a club station, and on that tower is where you would put your antenna. And you may wish to climb that tower one day to put up an antenna or to take down an antenna or to do some maintenance on the antenna. Well, you have to wear your safety gear. And when you are using things like safety belts or safety harnesses, and this is a safety harness here on the gentleman, notice he's wearing it and he's on the tower. He's not falling because he's very safe. He's standing there, but he's not falling because of this safety harness. And we need to know that the belt must be rated for the weight of the person who is using it. Also, we need to make sure that we have not exceeded the service life of the belt. It must be within the allowable service life. So we need to know this for the exam, that when you're climbing a tower and you're using a safety belt or a harness, you should observe and confirm, I don't take it for granted, confirm that the belt is rated for the weight of the climber and that it is within its allowable service life. You need to confirm that. Don't take any chances. Next thing, a dry rot and person falls. Not nice at all. That could result in death. Okay. Also, another precaution that you should take is that if you are going to climb a tower that has any kind of devices that's electrically powered, you may want to make sure that you shut off the power to those devices. So anything that's on the tower that's powered via electricity, switch it off. And we also say do lockout tag out, or lotto, persons who are in the industry. What you do is that you want to put a lock. So if there's a switch or any kind of, you put a lock to make sure that someone cannot inadvertently switch it back on. And also you want to put a tag. So it says danger, do not operate. So just in case someone only saw a lock, they may say, well, I could open it and use it. But they're seeing the tag saying date and time, who signed it, do not operate. So this is to avoid accidents. You don't want somebody switching on something when you have switched it out to go on your tower to do maintenance and they come and switch it on. Not good at all. That could result in harm to you and someone else. So you lock it out with a lock and you tag it out with a tag. That is lockout tag out. Okay, so we have dealt with grounding before, but we're coming to now the concept of grounding safety. And this is actually our last slide in this slide deck. So we need to be aware that when you're grounding, so for example, this is our tower that our antenna will go on. So this is the base of it. And you're grounding. So you have a strap here that goes to your ground rod. Note that you should not use solder. You should not solder these connections at all. That is actually very bad practice. So do not solder. Use the compression, or if you're doing some sort of card welding or something like that, but you should not solder these connections at all. And the simple reason is that if there's a lightning strike, the lightning strike may evaporate the solder. So you don't want that to happen. And next thing, that is what has your connection. You want to have a nice sound mechanical connection here. So don't use solder joints when you are using for grounding purposes. All right, so we say that solder joints should not be used with the wires that connect the base of the tower to the ground rod, because solder joint will likely be destroyed by the heat of a lightning strike. Also, last point is that a good practice for lightning protection ground is that all must be must be bonded together with all grounds. So this is the diagram at the bottom here. You have your ground rod, and notice that you have your tower grounded here. Notice it goes here. There's another conductor goes to your other ground. So you need to bond all of your grounds together. That is the best practice, and you will find that in the NEC or any other electrical code that you have for your country. It will tell you the same thing. So folks, just a reminder, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a special event that's going on. It started on the Sunday last, which is the 22nd, and it runs to September 12th. and that's our 59th year of independence. Our anniversary will be celebrated on 31st of August. And the amateur radio community through the Amateur Radio Society, that's TITAS, is having a special event. For further information, there's a website, and I encourage everyone, please consider visiting the website. It's 9y59ind.info or 9 Yankee 59 India November Delta.info. Check that out, very interesting site. We have a lot of information about the event, and feel free to look through the site when you get some time. And of course, if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask. We'll be happy to answer your questions. So of course, folks, we have Hurricane Ida that's around. Be safe out there. And also a reminder of our next session, God's willing, will be Friday, the 3rd of September, 2021. Usual start time, 8:30 p.m. So everyone, do have yourselves a good night. Do have a great weekend. Be safe and take good care. Okay, Sylvester, have a good night as well. You're certainly welcome. And good night, Adish. 7-3, yes. Ramzan, good night to you as well. You are certainly welcome. George, have a good night. Take good care. Ron, 7-3 to you as well. Jermaine, you have a good night too. Take good care. Okay, friends, you're certainly welcome. Appreciate the kind encouragement. Okay. Okay, Gary, do have a good night. You take good care as well. Yes, Franz, certainly appreciate you being here. I know how it goes, but always great to have you, man. Thanks so much. Roger, you too, do have a good night, and certainly you be safe. Thanks. Okay, Anthony, have a good night as well. Yes, appreciate the feedback. Thank you very much. Pleasure. And Eustace, you're certainly welcome as well, and do enjoy your weekend. Thanks very much, June. Happy Independence to you as well. All the best.